So I've got a script here that says, it is said that Rudy Giuliani is still at the top of the list for Secretary of State. I think I need to edit and say that Rudy Giuliani says he's at the top of the list for Secretary of State, because I don't know who says that.
Yeah, but it's
Does anybody here say that?
It's written all over his face.
It's no. Look, I was at home yesterday trying to get some things done in my house, and I walk in the room with the TV on, and there's Rudy going, I've traveled to 19 countries around the world, and I've got a lot of foreign experience.
Oh, you're watching the National Geographic?
I don't know.
Channel?
He was being interviewed again. And then I walk out of the room, and I come back in, and there's Rudy again going, I know how to run things. The guy,
I think he's.
I actually now, with all due respect, worry a little bit that he's lost his filter or something.
Well, he certainly acts like someone who already has the job, right? He said he's not going to be AG, and that would be an obvious place to put him as a federal former prosecutor. But he hasn't ruled out Secretary of State, but his face just says, I've already been told.
His words and his mouth. Right. And my point is, and for days now, he's been saying, I turned down Attorney General. I'm at the top of the list for Secretary of State. And you would think after a few days of being on the air saying that, someone might say to him, hey, listen, this is really untoward. It's really inappropriate. You don't get ahead of the president or the president-elect. Perhaps you want to tone it down. I turned the TV on last night, and the guy's like ramping it up. This is not, if you're going to be Secretary of State, I would think your president doesn't want you to get ahead of him. And perhaps a little bit of advice. Shut your pie hole.
I mean, he doesn't have his diplomatic face on.
You know what? That would be the worst hire in the history of this country. At this point.
In the last few weeks.
Really?
I know.
That's
well, at this point, because the guy has gone off the reservation.
Statement.
Well,
in the last few weeks of the campaign, he was given extraordinarily wide berth within the campaign. It's another another instance of loyalty. I believe it is still the case that until and unless someone dislodges him, he's still in line to be Secretary of State. But there is a clear effort. You see this with Nikki Haley, as Joe reported, and I believe another name or two may surface in the next 48 hours of people who are being put forward to try to convince Trump that there's a better way to go on Secretary of State. But it does beg the question of what job he could get, because it's the only one he wants.
Homeland Security.
I have to tell you, I mean, if I'm wrong, I'll be wrong. I haven't been so far, but if I'm wrong, I'll be wrong. I will tell you right now, Donald Trump would not hire Rudy Giuliani, who has run his mouth about getting the job. That has just sunk him, if he was even thinking about it. There are very few things that people know about Donald Trump. Here's what I know. Here's the one thing I know, and it's not a lot. He likes to leave people guessing, and he likes a big reveal. And that doesn't make him, only a showman and lead to condescending comments that people make about him being a reality star. He likes to leave people guessing. That has value for something to have a magnitude when it's announced. If Rudy Giuliani is already announcing that he's been chosen as Secretary of State, let me just tell you, that will be yanked out from under him so quickly, because that's now not how Trump rolls. But number two, he does believe in loyalty. You don't run your mouth. You don't run your mouth. You run your mouth, you're out. Those are two things you can take right to the bank, Barnacle.
Well, my understanding is that Rudy Giuliani sees the president-elect a couple of times, or at least once a day, every day, and has since the election. So why wouldn't the president-elect, after this has been going on publicly now for 5 or 6 days, say something to him?
Well, maybe I'm wrong, but I'll tell you right now, if he hasn't been told to stop running his mouth, I'll eat my hat. And he's still running his mouth.
I think we may see the exact reveal you're talking about. Imagine if the cabinet of the big positions ended up being Jamie Dimon, Nikki Haley, Tom Cotton.
Let's get to that.
That would change perceptions
in a second. In a second.
Well, Joe reports, Joe Scarborough, our own Morning Joe, reports that John Bolton is no longer under serious consideration for Secretary of State, and now a new name, as Mark mentioned, has entered the fold. Joe was first to report that sources say South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley is now under consideration. South Carolina's Lieutenant Governor Henry McMaster told Charleston's main newspaper that they are both being considered for cabinet posts. Haley for several posts in the administration, including Secretary of State, and McMaster for Attorney General. Haley backed Marco Rubio in the primary and was a frequent critic of Trump during the general election, but she did praise Trump's tone in the days after his election.
So far, he's done President-elect Trump has done well. I hope he continues to do that. I hope he continues to be disciplined in his comments. And what happens, I don't know. I don't know what we can expect out of the communication. I'm hopeful because of the tone that he's had since he's been elected, and I hope that he can continue to be that same person using that same tone that includes everyone and doesn't make anybody feel any sort of division whatsoever.
Such an interesting idea. We both, Joe and I, have met Nikki Haley, Willie as well. We've had her on the show a few times. We also moderated the debates in South Carolina when she was running for governor. She's always been seen as a shining star in the Republican Party, very up and coming. And just temperamentally, I may not agree with her positions on a lot of issues, but temperamentally, that's a good pick. And for a lot of other symbolic reasons, it's fantastic that she is under consideration. Nikki Haley will meet with the president-elect today at Trump Tower. Also meeting with Trump, former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, Congressman Jeb Hensarling, and rumored for Treasury, Florida Governor Rick Scott, four-star General Jack Kane, and NSA Director Admiral Michael Rogers. It's Hensarling who's rumored for Treasury, is how I meant to emphasize that. And for all the high-level meetings, Trump did find time to meet with boxer Floyd Mayweather yesterday. This tweet from Donald Trump Jr. So he has time to have a little bit of a good time.
Just going back to Nikki Haley for a second, I agree with you. She's a star. She is a star in the party. She may run for president someday. She may be president someday. But if Rudy Giuliani's foreign policy credentials are in question, where does that leave Nikki Haley's foreign policy credentials?
I'm going to go on a limb.
She came out strongly against the Muslim ban. I think that was a good step. But beyond that, what do you know about the way she views the world or what her foreign policy is?
You know, when you go to Trump's offices and you meet people there, people are buttoned up, their heads are down, they're working, they are put together, and there's a hierarchy. Never seen anybody like this in there. And so I've just got to hope that past is,
Anybody like Rudy or like Nikki Haley?
I'm saying some people like Rudy, running around talking about themselves. It just doesn't happen. He runs a tight ship. And it must be Rudy himself who's floating this still, because nobody that I'm talking to, and Joe's talking to, and we're talking to people pretty close. Joe often talks to Trump himself. I'm not sure if they've talked about this, but that doesn't fly with the types of people that he hires. I'm not an expert. I just know two things about him. He likes to keep people guessing, and if you run your mouth, you're out. Those are pretty good rules, by the way.
He clearly likes to keep people guessing.
Yes.
And he likes to shake things up. And I think when he dismissed Chris Christie, which I guess some people could see coming, and Mike Rogers went with him, that certainly shook things up and changed the tone. If he does go with Nikki Haley, I think that would certainly change the tone. But I always see Jared Kushner's proximity in all this. It seems to me that the relationships that Jared has is really important. Remember, Jared was key in ousting Corey Lewandowski. I don't think Trump wanted to oust, because of his loyalty, wanted to oust Lewandowski, but Jared wanted him out, and he was out. And it seems to me, even though the Pence got the credit, I guess, for the purge, it seems like that was, and they're denying it now, but it seems like Kushner was
well, 3 out of 4. Go ahead, Mark.
I was just say, if you think about Trump's decision-making on big personnel decisions, we have one example, which is Pence. And he clearly was interested in Christie, clearly was interested in Gingrich. I think people look now and say that those two choices would not have been nearly as helpful and might have actually harmed him.
Yeah.
And I think again, if that one example is the prologue here, when he's picking a Secretary of State, picking a Secretary of Defense, and these other important jobs, he may well go with the more sober, serious, credentialed choices rather than what's being talked about now, like Rudy Giuliani
well, if you look
or
at
Nikki
Jared,
Haley.
First of all, Jared's a very nice person. He's very measured in his tone. He's really humble, and he's very effective.
And he's also competent in his own right.
Extremely.
Like he has sacrificed, his time and his fortune to help his father-in-law get this far.
And don't underestimate what he was able to do to help Donald Trump.
Right, absolutely.
I mean, especially in terms of gathering data and getting information out there. to go down in history when we really learn more about
And look,
this.
when you're a billionaire, your circles are small, right? Because everybody who comes through the door who tells you something, you have to think, what is their ulterior motive? So Donald Trump has a very small circle of confidants. They start with his family, and they expand out very short after that. And I think that's what you can expect from the administration.
One of the things you do worry about, though, if you're inclined to worry about these things, is that on the intelligence apparatus of this country and the potential appointees, you keep hearing or reading about people, credentialed people, who are automatically excluded from positions and no reason is really given. I'm talking about Admiral McRaven, who was vital in terms of killing Osama bin Laden. You've got former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Marine Corps General Peter Pace, seemingly excluded. Admiral Mike Rogers' name is being mentioned. You just mentioned it, Mika. There's no more credentialed or intellectual or bright member of the intelligence community in this country than Admiral Mike Rogers, and you wonder how far he'll go in the chain of perhaps getting the job.
So it depends on who you ask, but the Trump transition team is either on track or in disarray after a shakeup last week that set it off course a bit. Sean Spicer of the RNC says the first wave of so-called landing teams are set to be announced today. Those are groups coordinating the handover from the National Security Council, State Justice, and Defense Departments. But according to the New York Times, there's been no contact so far between the new administration and the current one at the State Department or Pentagon, which has raised some concerns. A White House official tells the New York Times agencies still are legally barred from giving their successors guidance because critical documents have not yet been handed over. Vice President-elect Mike Pence was forced to sign new ones after the ouster of Chris Christie as transition chief. Pence handed them over Tuesday, but more are needed, including code of conduct agreements. And according to the Times, as of last night, those had not been turned in. The current and soon-to-be vice presidents met yesterday, and Vice President Biden reflected on the transition.
You think the administration's going to be ready on day one?
No administration is ready on day one. We weren't ready on day one. I've never met one that's ever been ready on day one. But I'm confident on day one, everything will be in good hands and they'll be handled.
And so the gracious transition from the Obama White House continues. To have Joe Biden step out in front of the cameras and say the country is in good hands is a huge gesture.